I'd been telling my landlord we had a raccoon in the attic for almost 2 months before the night I realized the raccoon had been using our shower. I'm Graham, 36. I cook on the line at a place in Chicago, weird hours, home at 2 in the morning most nights, and that schedule is the whole reason it took me so long to understand what was actually living above my ceiling. You hear things at 2 a.m. in an old building. Scratching, shuffling, a slow drag across the boards over your bed. Everybody told me raccoon. I told myself raccoon. I called the landlord 4 times about the raccoon, and he said he'd send someone, and he never did, and honestly I stopped pushing it because you get used to anything, even footsteps over your head, if it happens every night for long enough. My downstairs neighbor, an old guy named Sal who'd been in the building forever, mentioned once in the stairwell that our roof used to be easy to get onto. Kids from the block would go up the fire stairs of the taller building next door and cross the gap, back when he was young. I filed it under old man talk and forgot it. What I didn't understand yet was that the 2 roofs still touched, that there was a hatch up there someone had quietly kept working, and that the slow drag I heard above me every night was coming in through a door on the sky I didn't know my own apartment had. The thing is, raccoons don't keep a schedule, and this did. The dragging always came after I turned my light off. Not before. After. Like it was waiting for the room under it to go dark, and I noticed that and I filed it under my own paranoia. Because the alternative was not a thought a person lets themselves finish alone in an apartment at 2 in the morning. Then the small things started adding up, and every one of them I explained away. Food. I'd buy a rotisserie chicken and swear I had half left and open the fridge to a carcass. A loaf of bread going faster than one guy eats bread. I actually got annoyed at myself, thought I was losing track, eating more than I remembered on no sleep. My phone charger went missing from the kitchen and turned up a week later on the floor behind the couch, and I decided I'd kicked it there, because what's the other option? The other option doesn't have an answer you can live next to. The one that should have ended it was the chain. I'm religious about the door, chain, and deadbolt, 2 a.m. neighborhood. And twice I came home to the chain already hanging loose, off its track, and both times I stood in that hallway certain I'd set it and then argued myself down, decided I'd forgotten in the fog of a double shift. Because a man does not want to hold the other thought, which is that the lock on his own door had quietly stopped meaning anything, that whatever he was bolting out at night was already inside, over his head, and the chain was just a thing he did with his hands to feel safe. What broke it was the shower. I came home one night, 2:30, and the bathroom was warm and damp, mirrors still fogged at the edges, one of my towels not folded the way I fold it, hung back damp. I live alone. I hadn't showered before work. Somebody had used my shower, dried off with my towel, and left, in the hours I was gone, and put the towel back trying to make it look untouched. And I stood in that little bathroom with the fog still on the mirror and felt the whole apartment change temperature around me, because there was no version of a raccoon that did that. I should have left right then. I know that now. What I did instead was get a flashlight and pull down the attic hatch in the hall, the little square in the ceiling I'd never once opened, and I put my head up into that crawl space. And I want to describe exactly what a flashlight finds up there, because it wasn't chaos, it wasn't an animal den. It was made. There was a camping mat laid flat between the joists, right over my bedroom, positioned so a person lying on it would have his ear to the boards above where I slept. There was a little stack of my food, cans, and a heel of bread. My missing charger, plugged into an outlet I never knew was up there. A gallon jug, and I did not let my light stay on the jug long enough to be sure what was in it. And a spot worn shiny on the wood where a body had lain, over and over, for months, with nothing between his ear and the back of my skull but half an inch of old plaster. And directly over the head of my bed, where the mat pointed, the hairline seam I'd stared at 1,000 nights and called a crack in the plaster wasn't a crack at all. Someone had worked it open from above, a finger's width, and eased the edges smooth so it wouldn't show from below, and the wood around it was polished dark from a face pressing there night after night. He hadn't needed a camera. He'd had his ear against the other side of my ceiling the whole time, close enough to hear me turn over in my sleep, and every private thing I ever said out loud in that room believing I was alone, every phone call, every bad night, had a listener a foot above me, patient, in the dark, and the worst of it is I'll never know how many months of it there were, only that it was more than one. He wasn't up there when I looked. That's the part one have to live with, that he was out, somewhere, and would be coming back, because that was his home, more than it was mine by then. The police came, and this one they took seriously, because a nest in your attic is a thing you can photograph, and they figured out how he'd been getting in. The little roof hatch Sal had told me about without either of us knowing it mattered, the crossing between the two buildings still there and still open, a door on the sky he'd been using for months, and they figured from the food and the wear that he'd been up there a long time, months, coming down through the hatch at night into my apartment while I worked, or while I slept, living in the gaps of my week like a tenant I paid for without knowing. I went back through my own memory after that like it was a crime scene, and the small things I'd filed away lined up into something I couldn't look at straight. The night I'd come home and the bed felt warm and I blamed the radiator. The mug in my sink I didn't remember using. The morning my front door was unlocked and I cursed my own tired hands. The pack of gum that moved. Every single one I had chosen to explain, one at a time, because explaining let me sleep, and finishing the thought meant admitting the noise above me had a face, and the face knew the inside of my home better than I did. They said he had a record. That's my one sentence for the law part, because the law part isn't what wakes me. What wakes me is the timeline. Months. I ate dinner under that man dozens of nights. I slept 8 feet under him. I talked on the phone. I cried once about my dad. I did every private thing you do believing you're alone in your own place, and the entire time there was a person on a mat above my head with his ear to the wood, close enough to hear me breathe, coming down to shower in my bathroom and eat off my shelf and go back up, and the only reason I ever found out is that one night he got sloppy with a towel. I don't take top-floor apartments anymore, and I open every attic hatch I ever sleep under before I sleep under it, and I've made a kind of peace with people thinking that's strange. Because here's what nobody understands until it's them. A break-in is a night. This was a whole winter of nights I'd spent quietly sharing my own home with a stranger, and the walls of your own home stop being walls the day you learned that the space above your ceiling was somebody's bedroom, and you were the noise downstairs.
For almost a month, small things in my apartment had been wrong in a way I couldn't prove. And it wasn't until I stood on my bed with a screwdriver and got the vent grate off the wall that I understood the little rectangle of dark above my headboard had been someone's window the whole time. I'm Fiona, 29. I work at a pharmacy in Greenville, and I want to say up front that I'm not a nervous person. I don't spook easy, because that matters for what I ignored. The apartment was a good deal, old building, one of those layouts with a crawl space running behind the walls, and there was a vent up high over my bed, painted the same color as the wall, the kind of thing you stop seeing after day one. The signs were all small and all deniable. My shampoo went down faster than I used it. A yogurt gone from a 4-pack I could have sworn was full. And the feeling, the one I kept talking myself out of, the feeling of being watched in my own bedroom, that prickle on the back of the neck when you're changing clothes, that I put down to being tired and living alone and letting my imagination run. To be fair, every single sign had a boring explanation, and I reached for all of them. Because the true explanation is not something you let yourself believe on a Tuesday. There was one morning that should have been the end of it. I keep a glass of water on my nightstand, and one morning it was half gone. And there was a second ring of condensation on the wood a couple inches from where I'd set it, like a hand had picked it up, drunk from it, and put it back not quite in the same place. I stood there and looked at a water ring for a long time. And then I told myself I'd sipped it half asleep and moved it myself. You would not believe the explanations you'll build with your own hands to keep from knowing the thing your body already knows. Then the mail. For a couple weeks my mail had been showing up on my kitchen counter instead of down in the box, and I'd assumed the building manager was being kind and bringing it up. I mentioned it to him, thanking him, and watched his face go completely blank, because he had never touched my mail. Nobody had. Someone had been taking it out of my locked box in the lobby and carrying it up into my apartment and squaring it on my counter. And that landed worse in me than the food ever did, because the food was need and the mail was a message. It was somebody doing a small tidy domestic kindness inside my home, to let me know, gently, that they lived there too. Then two things happened close together. The first was the smell. Some evenings, faint, a smell in my bedroom that wasn't mine, body and cigarette and something stale. There, and then gone when I opened a window, and I'd tell myself it drifted in from a neighbor. The second was the dust. I keep a little dish of earrings on my dresser, right across from the vent, and one morning there was a fine gray grit on the dresser under the vent that hadn't been there the night before. The kind of dust that sifts down when something behind a wall moves. The night it broke, I was lying in bed with the lamp off, on my phone, and I looked up at the vent, the way you look at nothing, and the two little slots of black behind the grate were not the same black as usual. There was a wet shine in them. And as I watched, holding absolutely still with my heart going, the shine blinked. I don't remember getting out of the bed. I remember being in the kitchen with the light on and my keys in my hand, and I remember that I did not scream, and I did not run out the door, because some cold, clear part of me knew that if I bolted he'd know he'd been seen. And I did not want the thing behind my wall to know what I knew until I was somewhere with other people. So I made myself walk, not run, out to my car, and I drove to an all-night diner and sat in a booth shaking and called the police from there, which is the single smartest thing I have ever done, because it meant when they went in, he didn't hear it coming. What they found behind my bedroom wall is the thing I'll never unfeel. The crawl space behind the vent had been lived in. A blanket, flattened. Food wrappers, my food. A coffee can he'd been using, so he wouldn't have to leave to relieve himself. And the grate over my bed had been worked loose and reseated from the inside, they could tell, so that it looked closed, but lifted out in a second, and the insulation was packed down in a body shape right at that vent. At the exact spot where a person could lie and look straight down the length of my bed. Not the door. Not the TV. My bed. He'd chosen the one spot in the whole crawl space with a view of where I slept, and he'd worn it smooth. And pressed flat under the edge of the blanket, they found a page torn from a notepad, and on it, in careful little handwriting, was me. My shifts. The mornings I run. A note about which nights my friend Rhea stays over, so he'd know the nights I wasn't alone. He'd been reading me down through that grate for weeks, and the newest line, they told me, gently, was just my first name, written twice. The way you practice saying a word until it feels like yours. The wear in the insulation told them he'd been up there longer than the month I could account for, which meant that the first night I ever undressed in that room thinking nothing of it, he was already in the wall, already at the grate. And I had just not yet been unlucky enough to look up at the exact wrong second. They never got him that night. He went out whatever way he came in, and they found how, a panel in the back of the hall closet that opened into the crawl space of the whole building. Unfinished space a person could move through wall to wall, apartment to apartment, and I have thought a lot about that word. Through, that he wasn't in my apartment, he was in the walls between all of them, and mine just happened to be the one with a girl who lived alone and a vent over the bed. The building manager, after, went white and told me a previous tenant in my unit had broken her lease and moved out early last year and wouldn't say why, just wanted out, and I have never tried to find her and I never will. Because I already know the shape of what she'd tell me, and I don't need to hear another woman describe the smell she couldn't place, and the dust she kept wiping, and the feeling she kept overruling in the same room I did. Here's the part that isn't loud. I never once hurt him. In a month of him living 3 feet from my pillow, breathing through that grate, watching me sleep and dress and cry at my ceiling on the bad nights, I never heard a thing. There was no creak, no cough, no sign my body picked up except a smell, and a little dust, and a prickle I kept overruling. I check behind every vent now, and I sleep with a chair wedged against the closet door. And what I lost in that apartment wasn't stuff. It was the belief that being alone is a thing you can know for sure. You can't. I didn't. There was a face in my wall for a month, and the only reason I'm the one telling this is that one night it forgot to blink slow.
So the night we finally found the door at the back of our closet, my 6-year-old had already been talking to it for 3 weeks, and I'd been telling her it was fine, that houses make sounds, that there was nobody in the wall, right up until the wall answered me. I'm Porter, 41. I do electrical work around Detroit, which matters because I am not a man who believes in ghosts or gets spooked by an old house settling. I know exactly what a house is supposed to sound like from the inside, and that confidence is, honestly, a big part of why I let it go on as long as I did. We'd bought the place cheap, a foreclosure, big old thing with more rooms than we had furniture for, and my daughter's bedroom was at the end of the hall over the addition. It started with her. She's 6, so when she told my wife she had a new friend who talked to her at night through the closet, we did the parent thing. Cute, imaginary friend. We even asked his name to play along, and she said he didn't have one. He just told her when we left the house and asked her what we kept in the basement. And that, the specific weirdness of that, the questions, snagged on something in me. But I mean, she's 6, kids say things, and I let my wife reassure me because I wanted to be reassured. Over those 3 weeks she told my wife more of it, and that flat offhand way kids report the weather. That her friend got hungry sometimes. That her friend liked the drawing she made of him and asked her to make more. That her friend said not to tell mommy and daddy about their games, because grown-ups don't understand friends who live in the quiet. My wife wrote some of it down, she says now, not because she believed it, but because a part of her she wasn't listening to yet needed it on paper. A friend who lives in the quiet. A 6-year-old's phrase, and still the most exact description anybody gave, the whole time, of the thing that was in our walls. The things I couldn't hand to a 6-year-old's imagination started stacking up. Food again, always food, a whole thing of lunch meat gone, the milk low every morning, and I actually accused my teenage nephew of raiding our fridge when he stayed over. The TV in the basement would be on a channel none of us watched when I came down in the morning. My good flashlight walked off the workbench. And the sounds, which I knew, professionally knew, were not ductwork, a slow weight shifting behind the walls of the addition, always at night, always after the lights went off, moving from my daughter's end of the house toward ours and back. My wife saw him once, before we understood anything, and didn't know what she was seeing. She got up around 3 for water, and there was a shape at the end of the hall by our daughter's door, tall, still, and her half-asleep brain filed it as me, mumbled good night to it, and went back to bed. It wasn't me. I was asleep beside her. We only fit that together later, that she had spoken to him in the dark hallway of our own house, said good night to him, and that he had stood there and let her, and then folded himself back into the wall. And neither of us knew for another week that our house had answered her. The night it broke, my daughter came into our room after midnight and said her friend was sad because we were going to sell the house, and my wife asked her how her friend knew that. And my daughter said because he heard you and Daddy talking about it in the kitchen. We had talked about it. In the kitchen. That afternoon, quiet, just the two of us, about maybe selling because the place was too much. There is no imaginary friend that hears a conversation you had with your wife across the house 6 hours ago, and I felt every hair on my arm stand up. And I got my drill and my real flashlight and I went down to my daughter's room and I started pulling the closet apart while my wife stood in the hall with both kids behind her and the phone in her hand. Behind the closet's back wall, where the addition met the old house, there was a gap, a dead space the remodel had sealed off, and someone had cut it open again. There was a piece of paneling that lifted out clean, and behind it the space opened up into the joists of the addition, and I put my light in there. And I want to tell you what a grown man's hideout in the bones of your house looks like when you're the one who finds it. Blankets, layered, a real bed of them. My flashlight. Jars, capped, lined up, and I understood the jars fast and wished I hadn't. Wrappers from my food, flattened into a neat stack. And drawings, my daughter's drawings, the ones we thought she'd lost, pinned to the stud, pictures of our family, for stick figures, and a fifth one she'd drawn standing next to her that we'd never asked about, taped up over his blankets like a man decorating a room with pictures of the family he'd moved in with. He was in there when I opened it. That's the part one don't fully have words for even now. My light hit him folded up in that space 3 feet away, and for 1 second we just looked at each other, and then he came out of that wall fast, and I swung the flashlight and I got my body into the doorway of my daughter's room. And there was a bad 30 seconds in that hallway I'm not going to lay out except to say I have a scar through my eyebrow and my wife already had the police on the line and he went out the way he'd come, back through the wall, into the addition, and out a vent at. The foundation we didn't know was loose. They caught him 2 days later 3 houses down, in another empty place, doing it again. He'd done it before, other houses, other families, a man who moves into the walls of a home and lives off the edges of the people in it. That's my sentence for the law. It's not the part that matters. He'd been in the bones of our house the better part of 2 months. The dead space the remodel sealed off, cut open again and turned into a den with a straight sideline to my daughter's bed. He'd eaten out of our kitchen and learned our routine and made friends with my child through a closet wall, and he'd done it so slow and so patient that a man who wires houses for a living walked past that closet 100 times and never once read the wall as wrong. I keep coming back to how careful he was, how gentle, right up until my light hit him, and what that carefulness was for, and how much longer he might have kept being gentle if my daughter hadn't told us her friend was sad. The part that matters is my daughter had a friend for 3 weeks and the friend was real, and he'd been close enough to her bed every night to whisper through the closet, close enough to hear which nights we left. And the only reason he stayed on the whispering side of that wall as long as he did is a thing I will never know and have stopped trying to. We didn't sell the house. We left it. Walked away from the mortgage, moved into my brother's basement with 2 kids and a garbage bag of clothes each, and everyone said we were crazy to eat that loss over a squatter. But you didn't see the drawings. There is no price that puts my kids back to sleep in a house where a man pinned a picture of my family to a beam and lived close enough to hear them dream, and I'd pay it again, all of it, to be the one who opened that wall a night before he decided the whispering wasn't enough.